Amy?
Good evening, friends. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our fifth installment, fifth lesson, Booksmart, exploring Judaism's most important titles and authors who inscribe them, all about Jewish literacy. Very, very fast, short version. And again, I want to thank you all for your patience. We had a good bit of technical turbulence getting online. And so today I'm addressing my remarks to the folks on Zoom, the folks in the room, and to anyone who may have had some trouble getting on, and maybe they were resigned. Well, we'll provide this recording for them. And we talked about the Torah, the written 5 books of Moses, the 24 volumes of the Bible. We spoke about the Midrash, the process of extracting data, insights, stories, Jewish laws from those short cryptic verses of the Bible. We spoke about how there's a work called the oral tradition, primarily the Mishnah, the Gemara, which was the writing down of ideas, teachings that were for a long time extra, or I shouldn't say extra biblical, but they were not recorded, they were not transcribed, and they were made available for us to study, to explore. And most significantly, the Talmud, where the discussions, the debates, to clarify, to elucidate, and come to modernize and figure out what the Jewish tradition has to say about all different contemporary issues, challenges, ideas. And today, at long last, we're going to move past that to a very, very fascinating genre of Jewish scholarship. And so I couldn't be more grateful that you've joined us. And of course, I'm talking about what is many times described as Musar and Chakira. Very loosely, we might describe those two types of scholarship as Jewish philosophy and Jewish ethics or values. As you know, because we've discussed, originally the Talmud is a commingling of many different genres of Jewish scholarship. You have law, history, philosophy, scholarship of all different types. And it was after the closing of the Talmud, we started getting hyper-specific texts, like a text about Jewish practice, a text about Jewish thought and Jewish philosophy. And so that's what we're going to be exploring tonight, where at a certain point, ideas that were once just mixed into the Bible and mixed into the Tanakh got their own special books on the bookshelf, focusing, honing in, and elaborating on what Jews think, what Jews believe, or I should say what Judaism thinks and what Judaism believes, and what Judaism has to say about a person's journey of self-exploration, perfection, and improvement. Because Judaism takes all of that very seriously. You know, they talk about a yeshiva bucher, a young student who's going to go on his first date. He's not used to hanging out with the fairer sex. He's not used to hanging out with girls. And how is he going to lead this conversation? How are they going to get to determine if they are compatible, if they want to get married? And so he asks an older friend, what do I do? So he says, there's 3 big things you should talk about. You should talk about family, talk about food, and talk about philosophy. He says, wonderful. Well, they go out, they sit down somewhere, and they start. It's kind of awkward, and the boy is not exactly sure what to do. He says, family. Do you have any brothers? The girl says, actually, no, I don't. Then the next thing is, oh, food. Let's talk about food. Do you like gefilte fish? He says, actually, I don't. So he says, what's the last one? Oh, philosophy. He said, if you had a brother, would you like gefilte fish? Didn't work out. Point, of course, philosophy is a whole lot more than pondering silly ideas. But first, before we start, or before we dig a little deeper, and we're going to explore tonight a lot of different texts, and we're going to utilize our film as we've done. And if you have your textbook, we're starting on page 186. But the question we need to first ask is, isn't Jewish tradition more concerned about behavior, how we act, and seemingly less concerned about what we think about and how we feel. So why does the Torah, why does the Jewish tradition have such a large body of works emphasizing, focusing on your inner character and as well about philosophy? So the truth of the matter is that number one, what you think and how you think is deeply impactful to what kind of person you are. Your worldview does strongly or at least potentially influence what kind of character you are, what kind of mensch you are. But there's more than that. There are a number of Jewish mitzvot or Torah commandments that are actually addressing not behavior, but feelings, sentiment, perspective, and a sense and understanding of how and what God is. For example, did you know the Torah says, love thy fellow as thyself, love your fellow as yourself. So the Torah doesn't just say, treat your friend like a mensch, treat your friend like a decent person. It actually says, love your fellow, as if to say, and it is saying, that the Torah, Judaism, wants to influence and suggest how one should feel. There's talks about not overindulging in materialism, to be focused on higher living. Additionally, the Jewish tradition talks a lot about your feelings of love and fear and trust, all those things. To properly develop trust, joy, happiness, and all those things, you need to have a deep understanding of yourself and a deep understanding of the universe around you. And for that reason, Judaism provides a deep bench of texts addressing human character and addressing what we think. Let's go real fast to text 1, page 186 from Maimonides. And we're going to read a lot of Maimonides tonight because Maimonides is one of the foremost scholars who addresses both Jewish philosophy, theology, and also a good bit about Jewish ethics and values. Do not think that teshuvah, repentance, or self-improvement is only for actions. A person should also examine negative character traits, such as anger, hatred, envy, frivolity, the pursuit of money and honor, gluttony, etc., and do teshuvah for them as well. What Maimonides is saying is that Judaism encourages a person not just to act right, but to also have beautiful characteristics, to not have negative character traits like hate, jealousy, the pursuit of frivolous things. And so because that is so, there's a whole genre of work called Musar, which addresses Jewish values, ethics, and character development. You know what we'd call that today? Self-help or self-improvement. We know one of the most popular genres of literature in contemporary society are self-help books about how a person can improve themselves. Well, Jews have had these bodies of work for a long time, and that's one of the two types of works we're talking about. So a person should examine their character traits and self-develop. Now, as far as philosophy, why is that important? So the truth is that there are mitzvot, that require understanding, knowledge, and awareness of how Jews understand God. For example, the first of the 10 commandments is, anyone know the first of the 10 commandments? I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. God's first instruction was not a behavior, but about a belief. Because Judaism addresses and wants a person to have a healthy, robust Jewish world view and understanding. Is one of the great Jewish philosophers, mystics, Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, who lived 1565 to 1630. And one of the reasons why I love him, besides for his scholarship, is he made Aliyah. He moved to Israel, and I believe he passed away in the city of Tiberia. And his synagogue is actually very close to the coast. If you go to the old city of Tiberia, you'll encounter a synagogue. Unfortunately, when I went there, they wouldn't let me inside. You know why? his shul was purchased by the Russian Orthodox Church, and they tragically converted his shul into a church. But he was a brilliant scholar, an important contributor to Jewish thought. And on 188, we're going to read from his work, Shnei Luchot HaBrit. The Torah states, know today and bring unto your heart that God is God. A person should know and believe in God, in his existence. To say, know God with an in-depth knowledge and logical proofs. Don't just believe, but try to cultivate your sense of understanding with logic, in addition to the traditions of your ancestors. This is alluded to the verse, know the God of your fathers, meaning don't only have faith, also on your own, by means of your own understanding. And there are many other verses along the same lines. This is alluded to in the verse, this is my God, I shall beautify him. The God of my fathers, I shall exalt him. To say, when he is my God, due to my own knowledge, then that is beautiful. I and him are together, meaning I and he are bonded together, because my knowledge of him is internalized in my heart. If I do not possess a knowledge of God, it's only a product of understanding. That is a product of understanding only because my father said so. Well, then God remains aloof, distant, and not really part of one's life. And so, ideally, says Rabbi Isaiah Horowitz, a person should attempt to cultivate their sense of connection, knowledge, and awareness of God by using their intellect. And a person should be well versed with the proofs that are used in Jewish scholarship about the existence of God. So here's the interesting thing. Belief is powerful and profound, but should not be the end of one's relationship with God. And so the works of Hakira are there to help present the philosophical parts of Torah in a systematic, organized way. And that is the general or the gist of the objective of what we call Hakira or Jewish philosophy. They are meant to help a person have an emotional as well as intellectual relationship with our God. As we've done all the other weeks, we're going to start out with an overview of many of the works of both the genre of Hakira, philosophy, and Musar, self-improvement. And I'd like to invite you to turn really briefly before we do the video to page 192, figure 5.1. And I'd like to invite you rather, to bookmark this figure, which includes a large number of important Jewish works on the subjects of self-improvement, Jewish ethics and values, and that's the yellow line and everything that's on the top part of the page. And then you have the green, Jewish philosophy, Hakira. I'm sorry?
Which page? I'm sorry.
192. 192.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of words. You don't have to read it all now, but it might be a good resource because the video, as always, goes really fast and could be a little overwhelming. And so I want to invite you to use this to kind of refer to. And the idea is that Judaism always had Jewish philosophy and self-improvement, but it was commingled in all the other different subjects in the Talmud, in the Torah. But following the end of the Talmud, that's when there begins to be this more robust development of texts on specialized topics such as Jewish philosophy and Hakira. And now I'm going to invite you to please pay more attention than ever to the screen as we share a special film. And by the way, if you're wondering who's going to give that tour, well, the guy with the sweater is back.
Oh.
You know who I'm talking about. All right, so let's go. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you don't hear the sound, and when I give a shout if you can hear it.
Like spring.
Hold on. Something was wrong there. 1 second. All right, now we go.
Like spring water gushing with inspiring force, diverging into multiple rivers the further it travels, so do the Torah's wisdoms and insights branch into multiple streams of thought the further the Jews travel with it on their journey through time. Let's take a look at two of those streams, whose courses run parallel, and often intersect. Musar, a Hebrew term for restraint or discipline, has been used since biblical times to refer to ethics, character cultivation, and spiritual self-improvement. Musar is the field of Torah psychology. Chakira, a Hebrew term for investigation, is used for the intellectual probing of Judaism's ideology and theology. Chakira is the field of Torah philosophy. These twin wisdoms are woven throughout the narratives and teachings of the Tanakh. King Solomon drew extensively from their waters to compose the biblical book Mishlei, Proverbs, which provides observations on human nature and guidance for an intellectual, moral, and righteous life. He also produced Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, on the meaning of life and human pursuits and the role of religion. Another biblical book, Iyov, the book of Job, investigates human suffering, the existence of evil, and the limitations of theology. Insights into Torah psychology and philosophy filter into the discussions of the Talmud. In fact, the Mishnah devotes much of the tractate Avos to ethical conduct. But the divergence into independent fields of Torah exploration with scholarly publications exclusive to these two genres occurred in the 10th century. At that time, the primary centers of Jewish life and scholarship were located in Arabic-speaking countries, where academia had flourished for centuries. For that reason, the initial works of Jewish ethics and philosophy were written in Judeo-Arabic. But in the 13th century, with the decline of Arabic civilization and the academic shift to Europe, Hebrew again became the primary language in which Jewish books were composed. Rabbi Sadia Gaon was a prominent rabbi and author who lived in Egypt, the land of Israel, and Babylon. His book, Beliefs and Opinions, is the earliest known organized presentation of Torah philosophy and theology. Rabbi Shlomo ibn Gabirol of Spain wrote on philosophy, ethics, Kabbalah, and Hebrew literature. His Font of Life is a classic in Jewish and Islamic ethical philosophy. Rabbi Bachya ibn Pakuda of Spain penned the first systematic work of Jewish ethical philosophy that later inherited the title of its Hebrew translation, Chavot Halavovot, Duties of the Hearts. Its 10 gates explore unity of God, providence, worship, trust, sincerity, humility, repentance, self-examination, asceticism, and love. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi of Spain, one of Jewish history's greatest poets and liturgists, crafted Kuzari, one of Judaism's premier theological presentations, couched as a dialogue between an 8th century rabbi and a Khazar king who converted to Judaism. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the universally acclaimed Maimonides, produced Guide for the Perplexed while living in Egypt. The work leans on Aristotelian and classical Arabic philosophy to explain Judaism's fundamental principles. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid of Germany, a founder of the Hasidei Ashkenaz ascetic movement, wrote the ethical Sefer Hasidim, Book of the Pious. A brilliant but anonymous rabbinic author living in Barcelona produced Chinuch, Book of Education, recording reasons for each of the 613 biblical commandments, with the ethical lessons they convey. Rabbi Yonah Garondi of Spain authored several moralistic works, including the famous Sha'arei Tshuva, Gates of Repentance. Rabbi Levi ben Gershon, known as Ralbag, or Gersonides, was a French philosopher, mathematician, astronomer, scientist, and inventor. He wrote a philosophical treatise, Milchamot Hashem, God's Battles, and a Bible commentary that drew philosophical, ethical, and legal conclusions from the narrative. Derashot Haran, the Discourses of Rabbi Nissim Garondi of Catalonia, explores elemental ideas in Jewish philosophy such as creation, free choice, prophecy, chosenness, nature and miracles, mitzvot, and Torah learning. An anonymous author published Orchot Tzadikim, Ways of the Righteous, a collection of ethical teachings that became a classic of the Musar library. Rabbi Chiste Kreskas of Saragossa wrote Or Hashem, God's Light, to defend classical Jewish theology in the face of the Aristotelian philosophy favored by medieval Jewish scholars. Rabbi Yosef Albo of Spain penned a classic of Torah philosophy, Ikarim, Fundamentals, which emphasizes 3 pillars of Jewish belief: God's existence, the Torah's divine origin, and reward and punishment. Rabbi Eliyahu Davidas of Tzfat, a disciple of master Kabbalist Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, wrote a moral, mystical work named Reshit Chachma, Genesis of Wisdom. Rabbi Yehuda Loewy, known as Maharal of Prague, was one of the greatest sages of his era. Several schools of Torah philosophy are based on or derived from his many works. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, or Ramchal, of Italy and Holland, authored many books on Kabbalah, philosophy, ethics, poetry, including an ethical classic, Mesilat Yesharim, Path of the Upright. Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, a protege of the Vilna Gaon and founder of the Volozhin Yeshiva that produced several leading Torah scholars of the next century and a half, composed the philosophical and Kabbalistic Nefesh HaChaim, Soul of Life. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch lived in Germany and founded the Torah im Derech Eretz approach to Judaism, advocating a symbiosis of Torah learning with secular sciences and engagement with the modern world. He wrote philosophical and psychological insights on the biblical narratives, authored Horeb, a philosophical exploration of the mitzvot, and 19 Letters on Judaism, a work of philosophical defenses of the Jewish faith. Rabbi Yisrael Lipkin of Lithuania, known as Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, founded the modern Musar movement that invited fresh emphasis on ethical behavior, character refinement, and self-improvement in the European bastions of classical Torah study. Various schools emerged within this movement, including the Kelm school founded by Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv, which emphasized orderliness, thoughtfulness, and dedication; the Slobodka school of Rabbi Natan Tzvi Finkel, focusing on the human striving for perfection; and the Novardik school of Rabbi Yosef Yozel Horowitz, which emphasized trust in God, humility, and self-effacement. The movement became a lasting cultural and educational phenomenon, drawing on earlier ethical classics while offering original contributions to the library of Jewish ethics. Many of its prominent rabbis emphasized specific methodologies. For example, its founder, Rabbi Salanter, focused on identifying personal strengths and weaknesses and confronting a weakness head-on. Rabbi Ziv emphasized thinking before acting. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Leib Bloch taught Jewish philosophy-based ethics. Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman focused on integrity of thought and belief. Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz focused on the uniqueness of each individual. Rabbi Eliyahu Eliezer Dessler's ethical and philosophical insights were colored by Kabbalistic and Hasidic teachings. His teachings are preserved in the Musar classic Michtov Me'Eliyahu, Letter from Eliyahu. Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe focused on education and individual growth. Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan of Radin, Belarus, a foremost halachist, ethicist, and mentor of 19th and 20th century Eastern European Jewry, is better known by the title of his first publication, Chafetz Chaim, Desires Life, a digest of laws relating to ethical speech. Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Kook, modern Israel's first Ashkenazic chief rabbi, crafted works on Jewish thought and law with a distinctive philosophical, mystical, and poetic style. They are the ideological underpinnings for religious Zionism. Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik of Boston was a Talmudist, a philosopher, and a seminal figure of modern Orthodox Judaism. He led the rabbinical seminary at New York's Yeshiva University, and his philosophy was preserved in numerous articles and talks, including 2 landmark essays, The Lonely Man of Faith and Halachic Man. These are some of the primary works of Musar and Chakira composed throughout the centuries. The river of Torah flows on, as sages and authors continue to expound new ideas, insights, and lessons from the Torah's timeless teachings.
All right, who's feeling
Wow.
utterly overwhelmed?
Me.
All right. all of that is to say, there's a lot of works in the Jewish tradition focused on philosophy, faith, working out systems to understand or place God in the scheme of the universe with a philosophical slant, and a lot of talk about self-improvement. And we're not going to talk any more about specific texts and biographies. What we're going to do now in the second half of this discussion is we're going to explore a few specific subjects of philosophy, Hakira, and Musar, and hopefully we'll walk away with a nice thought, a nice idea, a nice perspective. And so please turn to page 194, where we're going to be exploring 3 different topics. And when you'll see them, it'll make sense that we're discussing Jewish philosophy and self-improvement, Musar. The subjects are creation, trust in God, and anger. 3 different discussions, 3 different micro topics or subjects, and we'll explore them in some of our early and more contemporary Jewish sources. So we're going to start with creation. Who created the universe according to the Jewish belief system? Anyone know?
God.
It's on the screen. Okay, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. One of the most famous, well-known verses, not only the Bible, of all written text. We know the bestseller is the Bible, right? So that we know. Do you know where this line appears? Where in the Bible it appears?
Genesis.
Genesis 1:1. In your estimation, based on what you know about the Bible, is that a fair and appropriate placement for this verse? Should it be page 1, sentence 1? Well,
Yes.
if you look at the Bible as purely a work of chronology, it would make a lot of sense. But Jewish scholars ask an important question, which is, why begin the Torah with this verse? Why does the narrative of the Bible start with creation? Well, what should it have started with? I'll tell you. The Bible in Hebrew is called Torah. And we said Torah means it is instructive, instructions. So surely the Bible should start with its primary objective, which is instructions. So then where would you start if you're talking about instructions? Well, you would start with the book of Exodus, where it talks about Jewish practice, Jewish calendar, 10 Commandments. Those all are much more seemingly appropriate for the opening line in the Bible. Because is the Torah a historic chronicle or a book of instruction? And we know, although it includes history, its primary objective is instruction. So why are we starting out with something that's more historic, a narrative, a tale, and a very important story? But you would think we'd want to start with something more specific. And so, of course, this is a question that's teeing up an important answer. There are a number of different explanations, but let's go to a philosophic.
But those things came later, Rabbi.
Indeed. In chronology, they came later.
Right.
If we think, or if we're claiming that the Bible is primarily an instruction book, it should start off by saying the Bible is the Torah. Here is what you got to do, and at some point, it could also throw in some stories. So, but your answer is correct. The 5 books of Moses, and especially Genesis, is chronological. So this is a question that leads to an important perspective or an important answer that Jewish philosophy provides. And so here is the big idea. You can turn to page 196, text 6. As follows. This is a midrashic teaching that Rashi cites in his commentary. What is a reason for why the Torah starts with Genesis and with creation? But we can question this. Indeed, there is a great need to begin the Torah within the beginning. This is the very root of our faith. One who does not believe this, that God is a creator, and thinks that the world always existed, denies the very basis of Judaism and has no Torah at all. So what we're seeing over here is the opening salvo in a big debate between Jewish philosophers and none other than Aristotle. Aristotle, and again, I'm probably not the right person to give a comprehensive introduction into Aristotelian view and Aristotelian philosophy, but suffice it to say that for most of human existence, he was the gospel. He was the Bible of philosophy. And even until very recently, he was the last word when it came to philosophy and science, which, as Dr. Moskowitz might be able to confirm for us, until recently, philosophy and science were part of the same field. And well, there's a big debate about how we all came to exist, which reminds me of the little girl who asks her mother, "Mommy, where do we come from?" And so her mom says, honey, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and then he made Adam and Eve, and that's where we come from. Later that night, she goes to her dad and says, "Daddy, where do we come from?" Dad says, many years ago, the world was full of monkeys, and then they evolved into humans. So the girl goes back to her mom and says, "Mommy, I don't understand. You said we're created by God. Dad said we're from monkeys." The mom says, "Honey, you're right. I told you about my side of the family, and Dad told you about his side of the family."
Very good.
Okay. So, anyways, let's see a little bit about the view of creation versus Aristotle's perspective. So, if you would go even recently, but let's say 500, 1,000 years ago, and you say, Aristotle is wrong, that would be like getting up and saying Darwin or Einstein or whatever. That would be like rejecting some very, very well-established principles of belief. What was one of the most important, or one of the very central parts of Aristotle's belief, which Judaism is not so into? His belief is that the world always was around.
Yeah.
And he believes in a God, a kind of prime mover, or a primary cause in his philosophy, who influences much of the change, but the world itself has always been around. It never emerged. There was never a moment where there was nothingness and suddenly something appeared, which he says doesn't make sense and is impossible. He says the world always existed. Jewish philosophers, including Rabbi Saadia Gaon, who we read about, we saw in the video, Nachmanides, even Maimonides, who were deeply influenced by Aristotelian philosophy, and they use it a lot in their attempt to prove different points in Jewish tradition, but they reject him here. They say it is absolutely not so. God certainly created the world, and it can be logically, in their opinion, logically proven. So please join me in an early reading of Rav Saadia. He is one of the earliest philosophers. You see his dates, 882 to 942. And let's read a little bit of his philosophical works called Deyot, Emunot Videyot, Beliefs and Opinions. Again, 197, continuing 198. God tells us in the Torah, all things were created from nothing, created by him from a prior state of non-existence, as it is written, in the beginning, God created. It also says, I am God who made everything. This truth was corroborated for us with signs and miracles, and we therefore accept it. This is his presentation. I then contemplated this truth, asking, can this be verified by logic, as it is verified by prophecy? So if you believe in prophecy and the prophets convey word of God, that's okay. But can you also use logic? So he says, I found it is from a number of angles. And here, in his style, he tries to go through a number of logical ideas. The first proof is from the finiteness of the universe. We know the heaven and earth are of a specific limited size. Their potential must be limited because something that is finite cannot have infinite potential. So being that the energy sustains their existence as finite, they must have a beginning and an end. A finite, limited thing cannot have always forever been there, would have eventually fizzled out. Second proof, by the way, today's science, even if you talk about the Big Bang Theory, talks about a beginning point where everything came into existence, supporting or moving strongly from this viewpoint of Aristotle that the world always existed. Rav Saadia, over 1,000 years ago, continues and says, a second proof is from the particularization and complexity of the universe. I observe how every entity is comprised of interconnected parts, complex components, revealing to me the imprint of their maker and creator. I found that this too is stated in the Bible when you see the heavens, the work of your God, the moon and the stars, which you arrange. So he is using or making an argument that with logic, he can prove the world's existence. He then goes on to give two other proofs. He says, from the fact that the world is, by its definition, constrained by time and space, and the world is constantly changing and evolving, it cannot have always existed. This idea, actually, the idea of intelligent design, actually is also brought in the Talmud. There's a story where someone challenged Rabbi Akiva. And he says, who created the world? Rabbi Akiva said, God created the world. The guy says, prove it. So Rabbi Akiva says, okay, come to me tomorrow and I'll prove it. The next day he walked in and Rabbi Akiva says, what are you wearing? The man says, I'm wearing a robe. So Rabbi Akiva says, who made it? He said, the weaver. Rabbi Akiva says, I don't believe you. Prove that the weaver made it. He says, what do you mean? If you see a woven garment, obviously the weaver made it. So he says, well, look at this world. Obviously it was constructed by someone. There must have been a creator. Anyways, that's the Jewish belief, the Jewish perspective. And today, again, as I said, science is pretty strongly, although there's an argument about exactly what existed and how it started, but the idea of a Big Bang, the idea of a starting point, is pretty much conventional wisdom in today's scientific world. And so, well, here, does it really matter? So suppose the world did exist forever, it didn't exist forever. Does it actually have any influence or bearing on Jewish life, belief, or practice? So here's why it is important. Because if you believe in God, but not that he is the creator, well, then what you're believing is that nature itself is all pretty much, or everything about existence is entirely dependent on nature, and God himself cannot climb out, control, or override nature. Everything is as it is. And according to the Jewish take, well, let's say, according to Aristotle, if you see a miracle, obviously it's not a miracle. There has to be a natural explanation. Whereas if we believe that God created the world from something to nothing, it means that God has access to an override button. And this is a point made by Maimonides, who also rejects the Aristotelian view of the world always existing. In Hebrew language, it's called kadmut, the claim that the world always existed. A belief in a pre-existing world, text 8, page 199. This is Maimonides. A belief in a pre-existing world as viewed by Aristotle, in which everything that is must be, nothing changes its nature, nothing acts contrary to its custom. This view contradicts the very basis of our faith, which is that it denies miracles and negates all that the Torah strives for or warns against. No, that with the belief of a created world, all miracles are possible, the Torah is possible, all challenges to those truths are answered. Or should you ask, why did God communicate prophecy to this one, not to the other? Why did he choose mitzvot and prohibitions? What is the divine intent in these instructions? Why did God not inspire these actions and prohibitions in their nature? The answer to those questions are because God desired, his wisdom deemed, and the same way that it was desired by God to create the world. But if you were to believe that the world is the way it is because it could not be any other way, then these questions would necessarily arise, and they could only be answered with weak and unsatisfactory replies. So I don't want to, the point over here is not to get into some kind of deep philosophical debate. It's an attempt to share with you some early philosophical conversations. So if you say that God created the universe, well then, number one, the God who made the world can override it with miracles. That's the advantage of what we might call creationism. Number two, if there is a creator, if there's no creator, then all of our choices are really part of inborn nature, and there's no ability to rise above any kind of nature. Whereas if there is a creator, well, part of the idea is that we're created in the image of God, and therefore we are gifted by God with the ability to make our own moral choices. Obviously, we cannot control everything that happens to us, but what we can control, according to Jewish philosophy, is our own moral choices. Lastly, can you have hope? Can you have hope for a future that's better than the present? Can we outgrow the present situation? Well, according to Aristotle, absolutely not. Whereas according to creationism, if you believe that God, there is a creator, and God created it for a purpose and gives us tasks, challenges, and opportunities to connect, well, our prayers and actions have the power to change the way things are sometimes. And that is the essence. Again, I'm not claiming that we made all of the good logical arguments, but we've shared with you a presentation of how early Jewish philosophers argued, pushed back against Aristotelian view, making the point that the Torah talks about creation. And so now let me ask you a question. Based on this, is the idea that there is a creator who created the world at the beginning and only afterwards talking about his instructions, does that make sense? And the answer is absolutely yes, because the premise of any instruction in the Torah is that a human being has the ability to take their own moral destiny in their own hands. And the Torah is full of talk of miracles. Well, those miracles are only plausible if and after the story of creation.
Right.
And lastly, the Torah is full of all about instilling optimism, hope that things can change and improve. And that too is deeply shored up and established by the opening conversation about creation itself. And that's why, from the philosophical approach, it is appropriate and makes a lot of sense that the Torah would start out with a discussion about the Creator and the creation. And in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So that is a strong case made by early philosophers, Maimonides, Nachmanides, Saadia Gaon. These are scholars who lived well over 1,000, from 1,100 years ago till around 900 years ago. Let's go to our second topic, which is the subject of bitachon, or trust in God. The notion of placing trust in God is a highly discussed topic in the works of Musar and Chakira. So both genres overlap on the subject of faith in God. One of the works mentioned in the video by the rabbi wearing the sweater, I don't know his name, but is the work of Chovot Halvavot. Frequently, there is a chapter that's very oftenly referenced in Jewish scholarship called Shar HaBitachon, Gates of Trust. And we're going to read a little excerpt soon. What is bitachon? That everything in our lives has a divinely ordained purpose, and that the journey of life guides us towards a specific goal. So again, what is bitachon? Well, trust is an innate human nature. As children, we tend to develop a sense, if we're privileged to have a healthy upbringing, children are born with a sense of trust for the parents, providers, people who love and care. And then in life, we learn to either extend that trust to others or not, depending on if they're trustworthy. But from a Jewish perspective, the most important trust would be trust in God, trust in the Creator. What is the subject of the trust? Well, trust that God created us, that He loves us, cares, and that our lives have a divinely preordained purpose, and that everything in the world is guided by our Creator. Now, that sounds like a lot to take in, but that's one of the ideas that Jewish Musar works talk about. Trusting and accepting that God is the master, has created the master plan, and that things ultimately and eventually will make sense. Now, please don't stop me now and ask me the question that's weighing on all of our minds, which is all of those things that are so miserable and painful that we cannot fathom that God makes sense. But let's put that aside, because I'm addressing it because it's, of course, the thing that's on our mind. But I want to just give you a presentation of a process as it's found in these works. What would be the value, or what does bitachon, trust in God, negate? And it negates two very opposite but not ideal perspectives. You have the super self-reliant person. Look at that confident, cocky look on his face. Some people believe that they are entirely self-made. Everything they have is because of their brilliance. And then, by extension, when they mess up, they put all the blame and all the weight on themselves. This is an opposite approach of placing a healthy degree of trust in God, the Creator. The Bible itself is very into negating a person who puts all of their reliance in themselves. If you'd like to take a fast peek, page 202, 203, we have a number of verses, texts from Deuteronomy. Beware lest you eat, be sated, and build good homes, etc., etc., etc. Your heart will grow haughty, you'll forget your God, and you'll say in your heart, my ability and the might of my hand has accumulated this wealth for me. Remember the Lord your God, as He is the one who gives you the ability to make wealth. So Judaism says, appreciate God's role in the equation of your success. That's the opposite of the self-reliant person. But guess what? There's another kind of person which also needs to be negated, and that's the fatalist. Life has no purpose, no point. Things will not work out. There's no point in even making an effort or trying. And both are terrible mistakes. Because the way Judaism looks at it, with faith in God, a person still needs to make their best efforts. God expects us to arrive. God expects us to rise to the occasion and to go to work, to get educated, to make our best efforts. And sometimes things are out of our control. But there is an objective, there is a purpose. And what does it mean that God will bless you? This is an important line. Text 10, Sifri. When it says God will bless you, do you think a person can sit idle? The Torah says, no, God will bless you in all that you do. God expects us to make our best efforts. But when we make our best effort, don't think that we are entirely self-made. Our best effort needs to be graced with God's support and assistance, which takes us to text 11, page 203. And this is an important work. And this is an important instance of a work that's in the genre of Jewish philosophy or Chakira, page 204. Diligence and effort are useful and necessary for all human actions. This applies to events in which both the divine decree and human choice play a part. In other words, there is a human-God partnership. Like grain that's produced by a farmer and rain, obviously the work and effort of the farmer is necessary, but he also needs the rain to actually cause the stuff to grow. So who causes your crops to grow? The rain, the environment, or the farmer? And ultimately, both are necessary components. For this reason, King Solomon praises diligence and says the hand of the diligent makes rich. He condemns laziness in order to urge a person to make all efforts in their power to obtain their objective. The psalmist also states, if God does not guard a city, the watchman's vigilance is in vain. A person says, I can keep my door unlocked because God's protecting me. No, God expects you to lock your door, put on your alarm, make your best effort, and then you'll hope that God will provide the backup. And so it's kind of like a bitachon triangle. Faith in God, but at a certain point, you have to acknowledge that things are out of your control, but not with, and you need to embrace self-reliance to a point. You need to make your best effort, but ultimately it's God's blessing that imbues that effort with success. And it's with God's effort that we can escape total a loss of faith and optimism. So a person should trust in nothing but God, but make all of his best efforts. And here we have a cute analogy, which I'm only going to share outside. You have a wheel, or what do we call this? A water wheel, or a kind of like a mill. This is driven by the currents, which leads the water to fill up over here, and then it pours down over here. And this way, water is both accumulated, and then it creates a momentum to cause the wheel to spin. So the water, the wheel actually delivers the water, but it needs the power to energize it. And so these vessels deliver water, but there's something that's driving it. If you create such a wheel, but there's no water, well, you're going to be in big trouble. And so similarly, you need to create the mechanism. You need to go to work and make your best efforts. But you also need God to place the blessing within those vessels, within those efforts. And that's the idea of a vessel. When one focuses too much on the vessel and not on the resource itself, God, well, then the delivery system might be incompatible. But when you appreciate that you're making your best effort and God is filling your efforts with blessing, so then you have the best of both worlds, a person's strong determination and effort, and then God's gift, God filling up the source with blessing. I don't want to get too texty over here, and I want to get us home on time. So let's just take a look at one more important work. And this is the work that I told you, Chovot HaLevavot, the work about a faith or trust mindset. Page 209. Bear with me. And then after this, it'll all be with the slides. We'll go through it fast. Bitachon, trust in God in all of a person's affairs, brings great advantages, both religiously and materially. Bitachon engenders absolute loyalty to one's creator for one who does not trust in God, by necessity relying on someone other than God. It would be wonderful to not have to rely on anybody besides for God. The person who trusts in the Almighty is freed of their subservience to other people. This person will cease to pursue, wait on them, flatter them, bow to them, other than in the service of God. They will not fear animosity of others or be taken aback by their opposition, and will be unburdened of the debt indebted by their favors. They will be free to rebuke the guilty without fear or shame, nor need to participate in the conspiracies of their falsehoods. A person who realizes that God is in the ultimate driver's seat will have a healthier relationship with the people around them. They'll be less timid, willing to speak up when necessary, and act as a person with greater agency and independence. Another advantage for the person who trusts in God is, if they are blessed with wealth, they'll gladly and generously expedite their financial contributions towards those in need. If they have no riches, they'll see in their lack of wealth a kindness from the Almighty in absolving them from many obligations towards God. So I've had people come to me and say, Rabbi, recently my business has been very successful, and my family and friends know about it, and I have no peace because people are constantly hounding me for assistance and charity, and it's so miserable. And first I say, it probably really is miserable. And I feel for you. But would you rather be like your poor cousin who's struggling to put a roof over their head? But who can judge? Everyone struggles, with different circumstances. But the point he's making here is that if a person is not blessed with wealth, they can comfort themselves and say, well, maybe I would be miserable if I was rich. So is this a coping mechanism? Maybe, but it'll be a helpful one. They're appreciating that their resources are all a gift from God. These are all religious advantages regarding worldly matters. A person who trusts in God will have a more tranquil, peaceful life. They'll be able to pursue their livelihood without obsession, without being consumed with angst. And so I'm going to skip the rest. The idea here is he's saying that there are tangible health benefits, peace of mind benefits, and social strengths for a person who puts more faith in God and allows themselves to experience life without stress or without too much stress. When it comes to the character development, the masters of Musar advise us to avoid. Okay, last point. So we talked about subject one was why the Bible starts off talking about God as the creator. We talked about a philosophical debate about if the world always existed or God brought it into existence, and the advantages from within a Jewish paradigm to accepting and understanding that God created the heaven and earth and allows us to embrace miracles, interchange, and so forth. Then we talked about trusting God, faith in God, and how there are tangible benefits to one's wellness, mindset, perspective, to live a less stressful life. And we're going to move on to our third topic, which we're only going to use the slides due to the hour. The third issue is anger. Generally speaking, when it comes to character development, the masters of Musar, of Jewish self-improvement, advise us to avoid extremes, to always try to take the golden mean. When it comes to many facets of our personality, we should not be extremely loud or quiet, timid or shy. A person should not be too irresponsible with their resources, but they should also be somewhat giving and have a have a middle of the road way of being. If you want to take a look, I'm not going to read it now because it's late, but you can actually see Maimonides describes this in page 212. Don't be overly stingy, don't squander, but don't give according to your means. Don't be too frivolous and jubilant, but not too mournful and sad. Just try to have an even-keeled approach, with one exception, and that exception is when it comes to anger. Anger is an exception. With anger, we're taught to go to the other extreme and avoid anger entirely. And the Talmud tells us that one who gets angry is like a person who worships idols. Why is that? And now we can put all of our three things together. If you have a perspective that God is the creator and you have your bitachon, your trust in God, you ultimately can accept that everything that happens in the world, although we don't always understand it, is from the creator with purpose. And everything that he does eventually and ultimately are good. So anger is to deny that the experience you had was ultimately part of God's grand scheme. And so you're denying that God is the creator. What is idol worship in its essence? Denying the creator. And so the Talmud says a person who gets angry, who doesn't realize that maybe this is part of the big scheme, this is part of God's plan, and maybe it's going to ultimately work out for you. Your car was rear-ended, but maybe, I don't know, somehow that worked out. So we only control what we choose to do. What actually happens is up to God. And when we are able to relinquish that feeling of needing to control and putting God in the driver's seat, that could give us a lot of peace. Now, Dr. Moskowitz, I'm sorry, I'm seeing now that you're muted. I remember last time you told me that you were on mute. So in case you want to unmute, I realized that you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
I hear you now, but I didn't hear you before.
Okay, thank you. You know,
So
I-
Rabbi, we're not supposed to express anger, but we're
No,
not
somebody-
supposed.
Let me back up. Actually, Doctor, I'm seeing you now, so I just want to say,
Oh,
I said in the beginning, but before you were on, that and I put in the email, we're dedicating the remainder of the course to our dear Aviva.
Thank you very much,
Passed.
Rabbi. You
And
know,
we-
we know that God created heaven and earth. Is that true?
Oh, doctor, you're becoming very faint.
Is God created heaven and earth?
Yes.
Well, where is heaven?
Well, you're asking a good question. That deserves a lot more
Yeah, we'll get to that
attention than the
tomorrow.
moment. But what we mean here is we're talking in that statement, God created heaven and earth. I think it's talking about the whole universe, planet Earth, and then that's which is in the sky and in the heaven. And that's what we're describing as heavens. But for another time, what you're asking an important question, which is the Jewish belief in heaven, the Jewish belief in a space that is more of spiritual nature, where souls exist and angels exist in a kind of state of being that is more godly and abstract. And so I think that's what you're referring to. And Judaism certainly believes in it, but I don't believe that heaven is a geographic place. I think heaven is close by. Heaven is near us. And so we talk about a person, a soul who lives on and is in heaven. We're not saying that they're a million light years away. We're saying that they're right next to us, but in a spiritual state of existence. And so they could be both, they feel distant because we're no longer relating to them in the way that we are accustomed to. But in the Jewish belief of enduring existence, heaven is actually on earth. And I'm not doing justice. I'm just giving a tease, and I apologize for that.
Thank you. No, thank you for that.
So
But I want-
Rabbi, I have a question, Rabbi.
Okay.
Rabbi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to talk about anger.
Yes. Oh, yes. You asked a question. I didn't address you. I want to.
Yes.
Can I address what you asked, and then you'll add if there's something else to.
Sure.
We are not saying that a person should feel angry but not express it.
Mhm.
I think it's important sometimes for us to express our emotions.
Right.
What we are saying is we're providing an exercise to help us come to terms with certain disappointments, even when they're acted upon us by other people. And the only way we could come to those kind of terms is by accepting that maybe in the grand scheme, some of those painful and disappointing moments can actually be with purpose and contribute something positively. And so I think what we're saying is not that you shouldn't feel angry, because that's impossible, but we should try to remind ourselves in moments of pain or disappointment that maybe there's a broader scheme. Now, if someone rear ends you or acts mean or rude to you,
Right.
we are not absolved. That does not absolve that person for being a jerk. A person that is a jerk must not be a jerk. We need to be a mensch, but that's their business. A person that's mean usually is more miserable than their victims. You know that.
Yeah.
They're trying to impart some of their misery to the people around them by acting mean-spirited. But
being a victim is not fun.
right, it's
I
not
had
fun at
that
all.
with
It's
the
miserable.
air
It's
conditioner
terrible.
man who
It's
was
terrible.
so rude.
And we need to hire a lawyer and sue them, or put a
Yeah.
fence or a security camera, or call the police when those things are appropriate. But we might also allow ourselves a moment to consider if they're trying to be a jerk and being mean.
Yeah.
There could be, that doesn't absolve them at all, but anger is a negative emotion that could be harmful to us. And so we are providing a meditation to help the person who's the victim try to let go of some of the anger, not to absolve the bad person or the mean person, but to give ourselves the ability to cope and navigate
But
pain.
it's difficult when you're dealing with a jerk. Sometimes you get angry.
I agree. I listen.
The jerk makes you angry. How do I explain?
Agreed. And I'm the first person to tell you that I have not successfully purged anger from my toolkit. So I'm not preaching from someone that has experience, but I'm sharing this Jewish ideal, which is that when a person is feeling really angry and we want to blow, and we're experiencing the negative effects internally, because sometimes when we're angry, do things that are bad for ourselves, where we get ourselves into a bad space. And so
Right.
Judaism and Musar, which is giving us tools, coping tools, and self-improvement, says, you know what? Try to diffuse some of those strong negative emotions from within by considering if, in the scheme of things, it could work out.
Uh-huh.
But that's not an easy thing. But we have an example. One of the greatest victims in the Bible was Joseph, whose brothers ruined his life. They sold him as a slave. They almost
Right.
killed him. And when Joseph reunites with his brothers, he tells them, do not be distressed that you sold me here. For it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. So what is Joseph saying? You guys were jerks. You were mean and terrible and horrible. But I want you to know that I've come to see that actually there was something good in that moment.
That came out of it. Yeah.
That does not absolve the brothers from being beyond horrible,
Mhm.
but it's a healthy perspective if we could cultivate and find it within us.
Mhm.
And this is actually an early source to this idea of not being angry, even though anger is extremely warranted.
Mhm.
And so that is the essence of this idea. If I have your attention for another moment, I just want to show you the promo for our next course, which is going to be in the spring, and we're also going to do it on Zoom. And I think you might like it. So give me another minute of your time, and then we'll call it a day.
Mhm.
Welcome to the pre-boarding announcement for Supernatural, a 4-session journey into the spiritual world of science, spirits, and superstition in Jewish belief. Please direct your attention to the following information as we walk you through our voyage. Our journey begins with exploring the essence of dreams. Discover which dreams hold meaningful messages and which are just noise to ignore, not to be taken seriously. We ask that you remain seated as we'll traverse the heights of astrology. We'll discover if the stars have any power on affecting our nature, behavior, or destiny. We may experience some turbulence as we travel through the world of jinxes and curses. See how Judaism navigates the social realities of jealousy and curses and where the real power lies. On our final leg of the journey, we will experience the true role of spirits, angels, and ghosts. We'll also touch down in the afterlife and learn how to keep in touch with lost loved ones. It'll be quite the ride, one you don't want to miss. On behalf of everyone at Supernatural, we hope you'll join us on this incredible experience.
When does that course start?
So I have to get you the exact date. It's going to be it's going to be after Passover. So May probably.
All right.
But
I'm
just
going
wanted.
to
So
Sicily in early June. I don't know what to do about that. All right.
here's what
well,
I'm going to suggest.
Yeah.
We'll worry about it later. It'll be on
Yeah.
Zoom. It'll be recorded, but I think you'll all get a kick out of it. So let me just to recap. Today, in a way, I would say was my hardest course because we talked about very abstract, deep ideas that deserve a lot of time, and we tried to just give a small flavor, a small snapshot. So we talked about 2 different types of Jewish literature that was originally commingled, and that's the word I've been using, within the Bible, within the Talmud. But then after the Talmud, we created independent works about self-improvement and perfection, character building, and Jewish philosophy. And we touched upon 3 different teachings that are highlighted in these works. We talked about creation and why it is significant or what the significance of the Jewish belief of creation is, and contrasting that with Aristotelian philosophy. Number 2, we talked about the Jewish quality of bitachon, having faith and having a certain degree of security, confidence, allowing us to be more self-assured, more present, less panicked, and find peace in our life. And number 3, we talked about the self-improvement of trying to fight against anger being a extremely negative emotion. Not that we can always avoid anger, because sometimes anger is highly warranted, but I suppose the idea is that some people are more susceptible and they have a very, very light trigger finger, always ready to get enraged. And ideally, we try to work on that improvement to have less anger in our life. And we talked about how having less anger that sense can be cultivated by having a sense of faith and accepting that maybe in the short term, it's devastating, but it might work out for the best. We brought the example of Joseph and his brothers. Next week, our final week, we're going to touch upon 2 very popular topics. We're going to talk about Hasidut, but more importantly, Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. And that's how we're going to cap off our 6-week course, Booksmart. So I want to thank those who are here in the room, those who are here on Zoom, and those who will be watching the recording. And I apologize for our initial turbulence in the setup. And if you're watching this video and you were hoping to be live and you got knocked off because of that technical problems, I apologize, but I'm grateful for your patience. Folks, thank you so much for joining. Lynn, go ahead.
Rabbi, did you send the recording to me of the 4th
I
class?
emailed it
that
to
I
you. It's
had?
in an email, but
It's
I'll
in
send
an
it.
email?
Yeah, but I'll send it. I'll try to. Yeah, I sent you an email.
Okay, so I should look in my emails for
Look in
it,
your email.
right?
You should have it there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you,